going to switch gears to our panel, so I'd like to call up everybody. We're thrilled that Polina is joining us tonight from Fortune to lead the conversation, and we have panelists from our very own Workbench, Primary Ventures, and Lerer Hippeau.
You can sit wherever.
How many of you guys are? How many of you invest? Okay.
A lot
in
of
founders. No. Okay. Cool. Okay. So let's get started. So this question is for all of you guys. There's now seed, pre-seed, post-seed, all kinds of seed. How do you guys? Where does your firm play and why? And kind of introduce yourself in the process.
Who should start? Graham, you want to start?
Sure. So, very quick introduction. Graham Brown, Lerer Hippeau. We're an early stage venture firm in New York. We're category agnostic, but we do a lot of enterprise, and we do have a heavy focus on New York. So we've made probably 50 or so New York enterprise investments over the last decade. We're super bullish on where the market is right now, and have seen it evolve a ton, I think, over the last 5 years. And our focus really with around our founders and sort of where we've invested on a platform side and on a technology side is really around taking a company from a seed to a successful Series A and then positioning for long-term growth. In terms of pre-seed, seed plus, avocado seed, like whatever people are calling it these days, we look like we're less interested in what we're defining it as and more interested in, is this a great company? Is this an idea we can get behind? And is this something that we're pursuing as a thesis? I think we're perfectly comfortable moving earlier and writing a $500K check into something where we love the team and we have conviction around the market that they're going after. And we're also perfectly happy writing a $2 million check into a business that, you know, maybe has 50,000 in recurring revenue and some interesting metrics that we can analyze and get a sense for sort of where they are in terms of product market fit. So we're pretty flexible in that spectrum.
Great, thanks. I'm Crissy Costa with Primary Ventures. So we are a seed-focused, seed-only firm here in New York City. So focused on the New York tech ecosystem. When we say seed, we mean pre-seed, seed extension, anything with the word seed in it is pretty much how we define it, because the nomenclature changes. But then like Lerer, you know, one of our co-investor friends, we do anything from, say, $500K of a pre-seed round, or perhaps, I guess, maybe even less than that sometimes, up to, say, 2 to 3 million of one of those mango avocado seeds you talked about. And so Primary is really focused on the New York tech ecosystem. Like I said, we do both consumer and B2B, but we kind of internally bifurcate. So 2 of our founding GPs, one focuses on consumer with a principal there, and then I work exclusively with our B2B partner. So why, I guess, only focus on New York seed is that, you know, I used to work for an open source software company before I joined Primary, so I definitely think that great ideas come from anywhere, but I think there's a lot of value in being a local value-add investor. So why we do seed in general is that we think that the beginning stages of your business can really make or break the trajectory of your company, particularly because we are obsessed with team building. So if we are local in the New York market, we can try to help you about where those early hires can, you know, really 10x your business early on, and we can help you get there. That's kind of our goal.
Hey everyone, Vipin at Workbench, principal here. We write checks of 1.5 million into seed 2s and Series A's. Lately, our huge focus has been around the seed extension, or the seed 2, primarily because, you know, that's really when the customer engine starts to rev. And we're here in New York. We've got 52 of the Fortune 500 right in our backyards. Amazing place to do experimentation with customers. And you know, why do we do this, right? It's because our team comes from the Fortune 500. We know what it's like to work at a large company, and so, you know, that's really why we only do enterprise tech. You couldn't really get me to talk to you about third spaces, or I was a little bit, but you know, or dog walking apps. Don't know how to look at those types of businesses, but you know, we can talk a lot about enterprise tech here.
Okay, so can you hear me? I think I'm just like not speaking close enough. Yeah. So Vipin, can you explain a little bit different VCs obviously value different metrics. What is the key indicator of success that you look for when you're considering an investment?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, we're the anti-metrics VC. The top thing that there's metrics that we look for that we like, but the number one thing that we look for are customers, right?
Like number of customers or type?
So it's not so. It's where you fit in what the problem that you're solving for and how you can segment it into a variety of different industries that are foundational. If you're solving for like a foundational technology solution. So basically, Jess always says, you should always find a VC who looks at your customer list the same way you look at your customer list, or looks at your pipeline the same way that you look at it. So it's really, we spend a lot of time looking at pipeline. We look at, the number of folks that have talked to us about that problem. And in a lot of ways, we're very thesis driven around the ways that we invest in different themes and trends.
That's interesting. And then, Graham, you talked a little bit about this, but what are some of the critical milestones you look for when considering an investment, metric-wise?
So if we're talking metric-wise, for us, it's so much is about the team and the market and the problem they're solving. And as Vipin mentioned, like the customer is so important. The last two investments we made were examples where both companies had been serving different companies in our portfolio. And we got really deep with those founders on like what they loved, what they wanted to see, what they could see the future looking like. And so, we love to spend time with customers as much as possible, and even the occasional sales ride along when they allow us. But in terms of metrics, so in some of the later stage seeds we see, you can get an early indication, I think, of metrics. It's not much more than that. They're going to change. Your LTV and CAC are not what they'll look like in 12 to 18 months, but you can get some early ideas around product market fit, sales velocity, how good is the team and product at creating urgency around getting buyers to join the platform and join the software. And then from there, you can talk to the customers and look at the data around engagement. And sort of all those pieces. And so I think those are leading indicators to what we're going to look at later stages, which is retention, and in particular revenue retention. And is that number above 100% on an annual basis? And so those are the sort of things that we're thinking about earlier on in some of our later stage investments. We're going to actually have real indications of where those metrics are going to fall.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I guess for us, I really try to ignore metrics, actually. I think for me at the beginning, I think a lot, obviously, about the team in regard to their ability to sell. So not only sell their product, but really sell their employees. So like I said, can you get people to come and work for you? Can you hire great talent? And are you, I guess to a lesser extent, can you sell investors? And are we worried that you won't be able to raise your next financing round? Well, we can definitely help in that regard. I spend a lot of time, when I say market, I think about, can the founder tell me why now is the best time to invest? So I think in VC, timing is one of the hardest things to get right. And so what's happening, not only is the market big enough, but what is happening at this point in time that makes this a unique opportunity? And then particularly on the enterprise side, why I ignore traction is that, like Graham alluded to, that it can be almost anomalous if you have all these early customers. So say you're doing a 100K pilot, but I won't necessarily know how sticky your product is for maybe a year or two. And at that point, I've kind of missed my window. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the trade-off between a vitamin or a painkiller. So we're in this kind of big bull market for a while, and I would say enterprises are more inclined to buy services or products or technology that they might, if we enter a downturn when budgets are tightened, they might cut from their budget. So the more painful that your company is solving, or the more pain you're solving, the better likelihood that it will be, A, your sales cycle will be shorter, and that B, your customers will be retained. And so when I do customer calls, even if it's just an idea, like I did a recent investment in a QA company, I talked to so many CTOs, and they were just like, oh, I'm so on the line for QA, and there's always a budget for QA. And so it's a top 3 priority for a lot of CTOs. And so I'm not worried about how, if the market takes a turn, will the QA budget be cut completely? Likely not. So that is what I think about. It was so painful, and then so many, to your point, Graham, so many of the people I talked to, and this was before the company even launched, asked me for an introduction to the company, and that's a great indicator. Even though they hadn't signed yet, there's clear appetite in the market for that, and so you do enough of those calls, and you start to, I guess, get quote unquote metrics, although none of those are really metrics.
So give me an example of a company or investment that you just made. Tell me about the due diligence that you did on them and kind of what sold you on making the investment.
I can start. Recently invested in a company named Hydrant. They are in the site reliability engineering space. What this means is your website goes down, and what are the best practices to get it back up again? It's actually a gap that's in the market. I know that PagerDuty just IPO'd, but PagerDuty in a lot of ways is a smoke alarm. And I'm not trying to get into the problem statement, but really like the question. Spent 9 months learning everything about site reliability engineering, and it's a new set of best practices really coming out of Google, and talked to a lot of executives about the challenges that they face there. SREs, managers of SREs went to a lot of different conferences where SRE best practices are being talked about. And in that journey, one of those conversations led me to Bobby Tables at Hydrant, and he goes by Bobby Tables. That's his Twitter handle.
If it's your Twitter handle, that's...
He was born to do this company. So he was actually an SRE at Namely, and on his nights and weekends was building for this solution. And so through these conversations, we saw this theme build and build and build through a number of roundtables around infrastructure that we've done. And so it was really that's what led me to meet Bobby, and we convinced him to start a company around this rather than taking this open source. You should actually build a company. And so
how did you convince him?
I think he always wanted to build a company around this, right? But his goal was to make it open source. I think we just showed him a lot of signal. Bobby always says this, I showed him a document full of anecdotes from corporate executives saying that, hey, we need something like this and this is missing. And so the timeliness of the need was something that he understood that we totally got and had relationships that could help him with.
Awesome. Crissy?
Yeah, great. So I actually just did a company and a health plan administrator for the modern self-insured employer. So I met the founder back in August through what is now our co-investor, and was so impressed with him. It is actually his second company. His first company had a modest exit in the 3D printing space, and now he's trying to go after healthcare. And I normally don't touch people. Healthcare is the one vertical where I think there's massive amount of opportunity, but it's extremely long sales cycles, and you really need to know the players. So I actually have a pretty strong founder market fit requirement there, and actually that hindered me. So I ended up passing before the founder launched the business, and stayed in touch with him, was just an enormous fan. And even though I don't really look at traction, he went from, I think, 0 to $1 million of ARR in 4 months. I was just thinking wow, the market timing is really there. I was pretty obsessed with the rise of the self-insured employer, which has happened over the last 5 to 10 years. I think it's 80% now of enterprises with 500 more employees are self-insured. So I think a lot more that we're not thesis driven, we're very founder driven, but we look a lot at macro trends. And so those two together was just this founder to me showed that he can execute a market where I'm extremely skeptical but interested in the timing. And then that is more what the momentum showed me, not really about the raw metrics. I actually tell founders don't get hung up on say $1 million of ARR or $2 million of ARR. I think momentum is a better signal to investors, particularly with the Series A. And for me at the seed, it was more that he could execute in a particularly difficult market with a historically long sales cycle. And he also attracted 2 co-founders at the time who just really round out his team quite nicely. So that kind of hit on all the buckets we look for.
Awesome. Graham?
One of our more recently announced enterprise investments that I led is a company called Palmetto, which is in the clean energy space. And clean tech is definitely one of those spaces that's sort of you don't touch it, or you didn't touch it for a while, because everybody that invested in it in the 2005 to 2010 period lost all their money for the most part. And you also had Solar City imploding within Tesla. So all these sorts of things were happening in the market. But what you did have is hardware costs had come down something like 70%. Financing costs had come down something like 60%. And you had state incentives to get people on clean energy products. And the only way that they would get these products were by independent sales agents selling them. So you basically had, I think there's 150,000 of these agents around the country that will go door to door selling clean energy products. That is a great market for us to think about as what kind of technology can enable that, right? You have this huge independent sales force that's selling a complex product. You have to get financing. You have to connect with builders. You have to run your own individual CRM, and there's no software in that market. And so they inserted themselves as sort of the asset-light version of what SolarCity was doing, with the software that helped those independent reps manage their business. It helped at the point of sale to get financing, and then it helped connect with builders for the build process for putting those solar panels actually on those residential roofs, and then they monitored that from there on out, so they maintained the relationship with the consumer. So they had this really unique model where they were solving a pain point that was a revenue driver for their customers, and they were taking a large cut of the transaction. And so it was a unique business that had, the founder has been in the industry for 20 years, I think. He was like early McKinsey and then Goldman Clean Tech, and then he went and did his own company, and he bootstrapped it, financed it himself, and was doing something in the realm of like $1 million GMV a month. And every month that we spent with him, he continued to just kind of crush the numbers that he projected and were showing us. And so it was a combination of, this is working, it's a great asset-light model, a founder who's super mission-driven, and then we spoke with, I don't know, probably like 30 reps. Every rep was like, this is critical for my business and how I make money. And so the incentives were just really aligned. And it was a market where I think we would, at first blush, we would have said, we're not touching that market. And then we just loved the founder and spent more and more time with it. And we're glad we invested. They've sort of 4x'd the business since we invested, so.
Awesome. And in addition to some of the metrics you mentioned, since you do invest so early, what are some of the very specific characteristics of founders that you look for, and like how do you identify those? Because I feel like a lot of times it's tough. How do you know somebody's, you know, a visionary or they're just like completely delusional?
You spend time with them. Honestly, you spend time with them.
How much time?
And so the way I, like, when I know I really like a founder, it takes a series of meetings, because you have that first meeting and they sort of blow you away. And then you kind of go back to your desk, you talk to your partners about it to share the pitch, and you spend some more time thinking about the opportunity. You're like, you know what, there's no way that works. Like, this person's actually just crazy. I like bought into the hype, really good salesmanship.
And then it's Fire Festival.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's Fire Festival. And then you follow up with the founder with these new set of questions, and he or she basically makes you feel even better about the opportunity than you did the first time around. And so you kind of have this, like, you get really excited, and then you sort of fall back and like, this won't work. All these second layer questions, and then you feel better about it kind of every time you talk to that person. I think like that over a period of time is really hard to fake. And so it does require time. I mean, if you have to make a decision in a week, which a lot of rounds are getting done right now in a week, that makes it very hard to know exactly like how that person thinks, how deeply they understand the problem, how good they're going to be at hiring, really. I mean, that's probably the biggest risk over the next 12 months is how well they'll hire. And so, yeah, I mean, it's spending time and then getting different perspectives. My partners all have very different personalities, very different experiences, and different perspectives. I think we're all aligned on mission, but everyone is going to have a different interaction with a founder, and we sort of triangulate around those interactions to make a decision and to know someone as really as well as you can over sort of that dating period.
Real quick, I always go through the technology hype cycle in every single investment that I do, and you just perfectly explained that. Like you finally reach that point where, wow, you're blown away, and then all of a sudden, you got to pick yourself back up and put the pieces together.
But like, what are some of the specific questions that you ask, or like, if there are no metrics, like how do you know? I can blow you away, but like, I don't have anything to prove.
Yeah, so it's really, we try to gauge the need by our customer network, right? So potential customers that have this pain point, this problem, we speak to them. A lot of our time, we actually don't talk to startups, we're actually talking to corporate executives. A lot of you are actually here in the room today, which is amazing to see. And so understanding the problem that they're trying to solve that year in their line of business is really the lead in, like the number one kind of space for us, like to understand like, hey, this is actually a really big problem.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that founders that really know their markets well, but also know what they don't know. So the founder I mentioned, I got to know over 8 months because I could have gotten it better price if I invested the first time. But it was more that, so first of all, we spent a lot of time talking about the market, and what I love about the founders I invest in, they have this almost obsessive like quality about the market that they're investing in, and they just think about it all the time, but then they also can say things, if I ask them a question, say, I'm not actually sure, but here's 2 things I've been thinking about to figure out that answer. And I love that it's almost a sense of humility, because I don't love when people just, say that they know the answer, and I don't expect you to know all the answers. It's so early. But the way I really want to hear you think about things. And so, if I ask you a question that you've never thought about, that is a little terrifying to me, because I've only known your business for, say, 5 minutes, and you're like, oh, I never really thought about that. I'm like, well, okay, especially because I'm asking questions like, oh, how are you going to reduce the sales cycle? It's not like really digging in there. So hopefully you've thought about that. But even if you didn't, you'd say, here are 3 strategies, and here's how I'm testing them. But I'd love to get your perspective. You see business models all the time, and we have this great conversation. So I think I said this to Polina earlier. I also believe that we're not in the buy side business, that we're in the sell side business. So a lot of the time, it's how do we work together? Not just, I don't expect a founder to sell me. Most of my time for the best companies, I feel like I have to sell myself and really tell our value, and we're really trying to create this 7, 10 plus year relationship. So it's more about how do we work together, and how can we be accretive to your team for the next, like Graham said, for the next 18 months specifically before the Series A, but likely beyond that as well.
So one thing I'm particularly obsessed with is the idea of SoftBank, just its existence. And now they have there's all these mega funds, and now SoftBank's kind of going into the early stage too. How do you prepare your founders for future financing rounds in this new world?
I can start with that. Recently helped one of our founders raise a Series B. And no, you're right. SoftBank has a $100 billion fund. All the other Sequoias of the world, Lightspeeds of the world, they're raising billion-dollar funds, and so they're deploying capital at a much larger clip. And you really do need certain metrics and a certain place in the go-to-market to be a fit for their kind of metrics that they put on you. And so this is really why we are seeing the rise of the C2, right? The C2 is, for an enterprise tech business specifically, is actually a very rich period of time where you have a live product, you have some early traction. It's a good period of time for you to do some go-to-market experimentation, right? So do you do bottoms-up selling or top-down, right? What channels can you exploit to sell your product? How do you package it? How do you price it? These are all things that, if you had a little bit of runway, 12 months to 18 months, you could actually spend some time really figuring out those channels so that you could get that larger Series A. And it's crazy to see some of these mega fundraisers today, The SoftBank effect literally affects everybody today.
Yeah, I think strictly VC now, when they announce deals, has 3 sections, the really, really big deals, and then the regular, and then it's the small deals, which are $4 million, so it's still pretty crazy. I think, so the SoftBank question is more about, I've seen pressure, I've seen multi-stage firms, I've run into them more at seed than I ever had before since I started, which is an interesting time to be in venture, because I think that I'm not sure what those implications mean. If someone has a $3 billion fund and they're writing you $1 million or $2 million check, that's different with us at a $100 million fund and writing you a $1 to $2 million check. It's a lot bigger piece of our capital. But of course, money is a commodity. So I think for us with raising future financing, and one of the things that we try to pride ourselves on, and why we hope that great firms partner with us, is that I think it's part of my role, and the nice thing about only doing seed is that we will never lead your A, we will participate, but it actually makes it really clean, and we have this almost symbiotic relationship with our friends that do Series A or Series B investing, because A, they want to know, if they ask me, Crissy, which of your companies are going to be raising the next 6 months, to put it on their radar, and then I get to learn about their investment theses, and then go back to my founders and say, actually, you'd be a really good fit with this fund because they're really doubling down on that, or they'll take a meeting with you because everyone will take a meeting with you, but it's probably not a great use of your time. And so I think as a founder, every bit of your time is so precious. So the more that we can help with fundraising by knowing who potentially that best fit is and reduce the time that you need to fundraise, the better.
So, yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is that where we sit at this seed, I think the most attractive opportunity now is actually going slightly earlier because of this multi-stage fund effect where everybody's getting squeezed by somebody slightly larger than them. And if you have $1 billion fund coming into a seed round, they don't care if it's a $5 million round, right? They're buying ownership and optionality, and it's a small percentage of their fund. Of course, they're going to lean in if it's working, but if it's not, it's not going to be that same seed relationship where you have a meaningful percentage in your fund, and really what you're geared around is getting to that next successful round and finding the right partner there. But I think where and we've made a number of these recently, in that sort of sub $2 million range where you are willing to go a bit earlier because you have really high conviction around a founder and you love the market, like that's where we're focusing a lot of our time right now, because that's a world that's not being as aggressive, and the pre-seed funds are probably saying the same thing about us. Like, oh, they're the worst. They're coming into our world and pricing up our deals. But in all seriousness, there's a great opportunity at the very early stage, I think particularly in New York, where you come in earlier, you've got a good team, and then the funding options at that $5 to $6 million round, or if it really starts working more quickly than you expect, straight up to a $10 to $15 million round. We're seeing it happen all the time, and so it's I think that's where we're seeing a lot of opportunity.
Okay, last question, then we'll open it up. What do you guys, what is the biggest area of opportunity you're looking to invest in right now? And are there any companies you want to back that you haven't found the right people for? Just quickly.
I'll make this really quick. I mean, explainable AI. I mean, you see it in the Wall Street Journal, the need for things like this.
Can you explain what Explain AI is?
Explainability. Essentially, data science models or machine learning models, they're kind of a black box. You can't understand why it came to a certain decision, and you need a framework to understand, hey, this is the entire lineage of why we arrived at this answer, and that's essentially explainability. And so we've had a number of corporate roundtables where that was the major topic that people care about, and so we know that that is an investment that we want to make.
Yeah, I have an affinity, particularly coming from a developer tools background, that I love technical teams. So anything that has technical founders that are also working on companies to make anyone's life or job easier, especially technical roles easier, and you can automate parts of them, but really to amplify what you're doing versus fully automate it. So I find that the best business models that I'm attracted to they do utilize the breakthrough we've leveraged in machine learning, but then also don't fully automate your job. It's really 10xing your time. And so business models are companies that are amplifying versus fully automating either business leaders, but particularly technical roles I find interesting right now.
So I'm spending a lot of time in vertically focused software applications, I think particularly those that have elements of a marketplace or network effects. One industry, and I'll give a couple just examples of investment layers that I'm excited about in particular, is within healthcare. So we tend to stay away from the enterprise and the hospital in selling into large insurance companies because those sales cycles are 18 months, which is basically the life of your seed. But things that we're interested in are like continuous care. And so when a patient leaves the four walls of the office, they are accruing more data that is probably more meaningful to their outcome and that their doctor should know about, that is being completely lost. And so how do you use technology to bridge that gap in a really intelligent way? And another area that we're interested in, and I'd say this is actually across a bunch of different verticals, healthcare just happens to be one, is vertically focused staffing networks. So if you're building a staffing network on top of technology, and in part why this is an option is because all these large staffing agencies, they're terrible businesses to sell tools into. They don't buy technology. And because they don't buy technology, they don't innovate. And so now you have this opportunity where you can combine data process automation and AI with humans to create a more efficient marketplace. And so things around nurse staffing is particularly interesting right now, where you have an actual shortage on the supply side, excess demand at the moment, and these roles are not being filled as effectively. And you have, I think, a lot of interesting opportunities that we're seeing there. And we've seen it across different verticals. We made an investment in the cannabis space that is doing the same thing, sort of owning that with a technology integrated staffing network for recruiting.
Awesome. Any questions?
Crissy mentioned that just about anybody will take a meeting. This is a question for all panelists. What are some of the things you wish founders would stop saying to you during first meetings?
What are some things you you hope founders would stop saying to you during meetings?
I'll start. We have no competitors.
Yeah. That's definitely the top one.
I actually don't. I don't know. Yeah, I would say it's more. I like to have a bottoms-up, always conversation about market size. So when people say to me like, "The market spend on this is $3 trillion a year," it's so opaque that it means nothing. And so I really try to get founders to think about their revenue opportunity from a bottoms-up perspective, not to be a stickler on your current pricing, I expect that to change, but also to see how you think, and just for founders to know, like, I'm comfortable if you say you could have those big numbers, but know that like I will ask you in a meeting to go, how do you think about it the reverse way, and what is your revenue opportunity? Because sometimes the numbers are so big, they just, like, it doesn't, everyone, I think founders know that VCs love big markets, and they throw that in there, but it doesn't necessarily help me get anywhere faster.
Somewhat related, but my sales are going to grow 12x this year. Forecasts are basically always something that we have to go back and try to figure out ourselves.
Yeah. How many of you have been investing in blockchain?
Blockchain.
We've made a couple investments. So on the security side, and then my colleague recently made an investment more on the infrastructure DevOps side.
We are actively looking, but have not bit the bullet yet, I would say.
Yeah, for us, it hasn't just emerged as a pain point yet through the conversations that we've been having. So we're, taking our time.
Because clients aren't using it yet.
Not yet.
We don't understand it, the enterprise.
Yes.
Kind of dealing on the challenge of blockchain. I pitched a number of VCs who, as soon as you say your enterprise SaaS software, they're like, oh, okay, don't talk to me. Sales cycles are too long, product development is too much, too expensive, especially at a seed or pre-seed round. Show me customers. What can you explain that? That's sort of a black box sort of decision point for founders. Can you explain, like, the founder needs money to be a seed? Why not?
So it really matters like what stage you're at, right? Pre-seed, seed?
Seed.
Okay. You need to demonstrate either that you've worked in this industry, felt that pain point, and had that experience, and have some initial traction to get excited around. There's a number of factors. Happy to talk to you after, and we should, kind of figure things out. But really, you do need some, assurances that this company can get to the next level. And so people look at things like traction. But I've never heard anyone we're excited by enterprise SaaS businesses, right? I think people are skeptical about blockchain, right? But enterprise SaaS is something that is, I think growing. We're seeing a lot of bottoms up sales. And so I think that that's exciting.
Hi, I'm Marie Berry, co-founder of Cara, which is a marketing production platform. How important is pricing? So when you see initially, we for example have an enterprise SaaS model with a setup fee and then a monthly subscription. And so, it's not public, we have by customer, a customized fee. Is that something that you look at? Because I know some VCs are kind of trying to see with that the potential revenue and by customer. What are your thoughts about that?
I think pricing it changes. I like to always hear how you think. So anything I ask you about pricing, I would just say, how did you come to that number? And pricing itself is a black box. I made the enterprise product of my last company that was open source and free. So I definitely understand the difficulty of how do you charge for something that's free. But I more so think about, I probably would have a better discussion around budgets and what are the discussions that you're having with customers and what's the feedback you get, because we expect pricing to change, and hopefully as your product expands, even if you add horizontal features, that you can increase pricing. But that appetite and that budget is going back to your point about sales cycle. It might say, is it like something like QA, right? It's a pretty defined budget. It's not a new market. Whereas if you're investing in a newer market, you might be more worried about budget because it's not clear. Is it coming out of, for example, in HR, is it D&I, is it L&D? Because when you're selling to the enterprises, a lot of times these are set pretty early on once a year and not really looked at again. I think that's why a lot of VCs have loved that prosumer type model like Slack, where business unit heads can just swipe their credit card. So it really depends on your business model, but pricing should be a deeper conversation because maybe there's something beyond that.
How are you? First, I work from Employee Cycle. We're an HR analytics dashboard. There was a lot of talk about C+, C extension, C and beyond. So how do you differentiate between when someone is not hitting their milestones but they need a C+, versus when you were explaining you might need this little bit of extra capital to hit some additional milestones before you get to your Series A? Because it almost sounds like the same thing, that you didn't hit your milestones.
Yeah. Graham, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I can go. It's so great question. That's very nuanced, and really, so for us, it's up to sort of each individual partner and team member who's responsible for that company, who's spending time with them, to understand what the problem is and what an extension or bridge or whatever you want to call it is going to achieve, and what that brings the company, right? So there's I think the clear cases where it's not working, and we all know it's not working, and so we have to figure out something else or find a soft landing. And then there's the gray area, and that's really like something that you got to work very close one-on-one to figure out. You got to look into, well, what's the problem, right? Is it a sales velocity question? Is it top of funnel? Is it top of funnel? Is it bottom funnel? I mean, I think you got to really understand what is it that has led us to this point where we're not raising a Series A. But thinking about the ones that we've been excited about recently, you see great evidence. It doesn't make sense for a team to go to market, and so you can just step up and do something internally, and put the company in a much better position 6 to 12 months down the road, and you just do that very quickly versus having a company go out to market and pitch something that they're not ready to pitch, right? Which is what you don't want to have happen, because you do, as much as folks may say that you don't taint the market, you taint the market when you go out there and you meet all the firms, you meet the partners, they're anchored on that the next time you see them. And so yeah, I mean, I think it is nuanced, but it's having a close relationship with your investor and vice versa, and understanding, is the problem fixable? Is it a delay? Is it is it something that with this capital we'll get past and be able to raise a successful follow-on round?
Just to add on to that, basically you asked what are the milestones to raise C+, right?
Well, no, it's why would you? The question was more around how do you differentiate between if C+ is helping you get to a good place, or if C+ is helping you get out of a bad place.
Yeah.
Well, because it almost sounds like the same thing. Like Graham was saying, it's very close.
Yeah, no, I think Graham hit the nail on the head there. Oftentimes you have the that certain things are really working, and if you just had a little bit more rocket fuel, if you will, to test and experiment on some of those ideas, then and if you feel that strongly that you can get to a certain place, that's definitely a seed to type of opportunity.
As more businesses and enterprise technology companies are producing and leveraging consumer data, what do you guys feel like is either responsibility or transparency, or how do you see that trending to be more transparent and consumers having access to challenges? Does that make sense?
So
Repeat the question, yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying that how do we see consumers in the consumers wanting to control their data in the enterprise.
Just like how do you see the transparency of that consumer data that the businesses are using, and these software companies are gathering? How do you feel that they should be responsible for sharing that transparency with the consumer?
Yeah. So it's really about sharing consumer data, or what is the impetus of businesses to share consumer data with the end consumer? I actually think there's particularly a lot, because at the end of this year is the California, like even more strict than GDPR is actually California's legislation that's coming out. So there's intensified pressure ever since GDPR came out about what you're doing with consumers' data. I think it'll only get tighter and stricter as there is more, like, you know, what we've seen on the backlash against Facebook, for example, has been really telling about what kind of business models we can even employ in the future. I'm not sure, though, as much as consumers say they want to own their data, I always find I'm a little skeptical. I think there are certain verticals where that might be truer. So healthcare could probably be one. But another one is that, like, I'm not sure that I think they want to pretend they care and get outraged, but then if you have to introduce a new business model, for example, to a company, you know, you could say that Facebook is a B2B company as advertisers. If you had to get rid of all these free products and add in a different business model, would they care as much? And I'm not sure that I believe that yet, and I don't know if it'll affect at least enterprises right now, unless, I don't know. Like, it really depends on who their end consumer is and how much pressure they're facing, because with GDPR right now, you can almost show that you're good enough and they're trying to get there, because there's so much infrastructure that you'd have to undo, but I don't know how long that'll hold up personally.
Okay, last question. Oh, sorry, I'm so bad at
Maybe we could take two.
Everything's very positive when you're first making your investments. But how many of your investments succeed and how many don't?
We're only 4 years old, so we'll see.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, the rough numbers in the industry are a third will go away, basically. A third will kind of be okay and find a landing and get the money. Everyone will get money back, and maybe founders will make a little bit. And then a third is your upside, is the upside, right? And that's like rough math. Even our fund that's 9 years old, it's too early to tell if that's what it will look like. Seed, it takes a long time. But in terms of like broad strokes, I think that's how people think about the industry.
9 years is a pretty decent amount of time. So what time frame do you give yourself? Your 15-year funds? I mean, how are you structured?
So we're 10-year funds, but we're going to extend, right? Right now it's mostly great companies. These are large companies that are left. And so a couple may go away, a couple may not be as large as we expect them to be, but for the most part, these are businesses that are now profitable or at a scale where they could be profitable.
Okay, last question.
So there's many routes to success, and there's different people who have different types of approaches. So let's assume there's two approaches here. One is velocity, where a startup finds market fit, and they're going to spend a longer amount of time going deep into the technology infrastructure to maintain their success. The other kind of model is a persistence model, where somebody's kind of built up the platform slowly, and now they're going to take the funding and really accelerate. In what situations do you prefer one over another?
I think VCs generally love the velocity play, right? You see things snowball, and we love growth, right? And so, like, we tend to favor those businesses, whereas, you know, on the other hand, you know, you might have all the signals that, you know, yes, get some rocket fuel and you can probably take this thing to the next level. But, you know, it really needs to be backed up on data and what we believe the founders can reasonably accomplish.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Let's give one more round of applause for our esteemed panelists. Thank you, guys. So our next event is May 8th, and we have an interesting one. We have a fireside chat with Justin Kan. Many of you may know him. He sold Twitch for $1 billion to Amazon, and last summer he had an interesting post on, after that exit, he wrote, "Why love B2B startups more than B2C. So he's going to unpack that some more, despite that huge exit, with us next month. So we hope to see you there.